I think it's fairly easy to say that the Destiny's Bounty is one of the most iconic vehicles from the show's history. And I don't think that's a hot take whatsoever, because it's fairly easy to say that because it's been around basically for the entirety of the show, but it has a very interesting history, to put it lightly. So I thought I would make a video where I cover the history of the ship itself, and then provide a little bit of a ranking when it comes to all of its designs, because to put it lightly, there are a lot of versions of the Destiny's Bounty, and you will find out why fairly quickly. But let's get straight into it and ask the important question. What is the Destiny's Bounty? Well, it is a red airship that the Ninja used after the Serpentine destroyed the Monastery of Spinjitzu in Season 1. And this ship was turned into the flying warship that they have today. And I call it a warship because eventually it was outfitted with a lot of weaponry that they could use against their foes. So at this point, it was a warship. But before the Ninja did own it, it was owned by one of the most feared pirates in all of the land, which was Captain Soto and his crew, and they used it to battle a lot of enemies, including the Sky Pirates, before they eventually lost it. And how did they lose the ship, you say? Well, they crashed into a rocky cliff and it killed the entire crew, which is a bit of an unfortunate end for the legendary pirate crew themselves, but unfortunately, it is what it is. But they did use it for a very long time before this happened. But where they crashed the ship is where the Ninja found it, and like I said, they made it their own. They gave it the ability to fly, they made it a home. It was a very nice bit of renovation that was done to it, and they held it for a nice deal of time. And this bounty is one of the more iconic ones that we do get to see, because it's the one that a lot of people associate with the show, because it came out in Season 1, which is probably one of the most nostalgic seasons for a lot of people. But unfortunately, this bounty did come to an end when the Great Devourer would make it into its dinner, because he took it and ate it and crunched it completely to bits in the Sea of Sand, and then that was it for the bounty, or at least so we thought. Because as far as we were aware, and as far as the Ninja were aware, that was it for the bounty. But after the events of Season 1 and the Devourer's death, Garmadon, who now had the golden weapons, rose to the bounty from the ashes, and made it into what was then called the Black Bounty. And this is what Garmadon and the Serpentine used until the Ninja took it back. But before they did, we did get to see what a different version of the bounty would have looked like. And for the most part, when I say what a different bounty looked like, I mean this bounty was just the bounty that the Ninja used, but it had a bunch of darker colours. But honestly, it was a nice shade of colour at that, and it was interesting to see while it lasted. But unfortunately, it was only for about 4 episodes. But yes, the Ninja did get it back, and they restored the bounty to the former appearance. And this means that the bounty had no difference from where it looked like before. So this is, by all accounts, what the original bounty was, because it was not long after this where the bounty was again damaged beyond all repair because of the Overlord. Well, actually, on a technicality, the bounty gets damaged on 3 separate occasions, but the Overlord is the one that finishes it off. It initially got re-damaged by the Stone Army escaping Ninjago City, and then it got damaged when the Ninja were going to the Dark Island, but the ultimate thing that stopped it was when Dr. Julian used it to shield Lloyd from one of the Dark Matter missiles. But ultimately, this is again what put the bounty to its knees, and this is the last we see of this version of the bounty. And we don't actually get a bounty in Season 3, but after the defeat of the Golden Master, Wu and Nia at one point in time made the decision to redesign and rebuild the ship, and it was then used to defeat Chen in Season 4. And I will say, for the most part, this version of the bounty is much more sleek and modern looking, and it comes equipped with different kind of weapons, and this one is just a very nice design overall. And this is the one that we do get to see, like I said, from Season 4 all the way through until Season 7. And for the most part, nothing really happens to this bounty until its end. Because in Season 5, it was used and there was no outright damage really made to it, apart from the initial crash, but it repaired itself fairly quickly. And then in Season 6, it was impounded for the whole time. And then in Season 7 is where we officially lost it, because that is when the Vermilion shot down the bounty from all the way from Air Jitsu Temple down to the ground. And this was the official time that the bounty was destroyed once more. And it is by this point where you realise that the bounty simply couldn't take a break. But ultimately, these are one of the more longer periods where we do get the same bounty, so it's only going to get worse from here. But because this version of the bounty was shot down, of course, this means that the bounty had to be repaired once more. And this time, as of Season 8, it took on the design of the movie bounty. And this one is a very nice design. It goes back to a more standard look. It doesn't look as high-tech, but it does have true dragon heads on the front. And ultimately, this is a very bulky bounty, but honestly, a very nice looking one at that. And this version of the bounty does just get a great deal of abuse, let's be honest. Because we see it in Season 8, and in the very same season it's introduced, it again gets destroyed. This time being crushed by the Colossus that Garmadon creates at the end of this season. And it absolutely rips it to ribbons, if you were to believe what you had seen. In reality, the ninja used Traveler's Tea to go to the first realm, and it took a large chunk of the bounty with it. And this then leads to its only appearance in Season 9, where we see the destroyed carcass of it in both Ninjago and the First Realm. In the First Realm, it then gets repurposed into Dragon Hunter vehicles, whereas in Ninjago, it just lays to rest. But that is all we get to see of it in Season 9. And then this takes us to Season 10, where the city rebuilt the ninja their bounty from the plants that they recovered. And again, it is identical to the Season 8 and 9 bounty. But the only thing is that it has notable technical difficulties because essentially it wasn't built by the ninja. And it led to certain issues. And this is the ship that we get to see all the way through until Master of the Mountain, where, when the ninja were on their way to Shintaro, again, the bounty gets damaged, but not totally destroyed this time. For once! But yeah, the bounty does get repaired by the army of Shintaro, and then it leads to a bit of a hybrid between the Season 8 bounty and the Season 4 bounty, because while it's a little more modern looking, it still holds the properties of the original bounty that we see in Season 1 and ultimately in Season 8. And this is probably because this is based on the legacy design. But this bounty does get used through Season 14 and Season 15. And I will say, during the island, it does get used to go through the storm belt and make their way to the island that they have to go for the storm amulet. And it does get damaged by Wojira's storm. So again, bounty getting damaged once again. But ultimately, it doesn't get destroyed from this. But then that ultimately does bring us to Crystallize, where, when the bounty was repaired after the island, it does get impounded by the police for a fair bit of time, until the ninja steal it back, only for the Overlord to split it in half and destroy the bounty once again. Honestly, this bounty cannot take a break. Every single time the ninja get a bounty, it does have to be destroyed in some way. It feels almost like a rite of passage for the Destiny's bounty. But then this does lead us to the bounty that they used during the merge. And I'm going to be honest, I'm not entirely sure which bounty this is, because it does resemble the bounty that was just destroyed by the Overlord. So maybe they did repair it, but it is not the bounty we get in the Dragon's Rising sets, or just in Dragon's Rising in general, because I'll get to that in a minute. But ultimately, it doesn't matter, because while it was used to save people from the merge, it's not long after where Kai crashes it into the monastery, or just below the monastery, and it's again destroyed. So that is ultimately, again, another bounty destroyed. But this then ultimately does just lead us to another bounty, and this is the Dragon's Rising one, which is based on the Dragon's Rising sets. It's a very thin one, and a very flat looking bounty at that. And it was ultimately used again until it was crashed in Season 2 of Dragon's Rising, and that leads us to where it is today. So as we speak, there is no active version of the bounty, and I'm guessing we're going to get a new one in Season 3, but ultimately, it's anyone's guess what comes from now onwards, but we will surely find out soon enough. But that is the complete history of the Destiny's bounty. So let's give it a bit of a ranking from the worst to the best, because there's a lot of versions to contend with. And ultimately, there is not a bad Destiny's bounty. I just think there's simply ones that look better than the others. So let's start out with the worst one, which in my opinion is the merge bounty, the one that was just destroyed. Because I don't like how thin it is ultimately, and it just ultimately looks incomplete. because there's a massive gap underneath, it gets extremely thin, and it's just missing a lot of those aspects that made the bounty, well, the bounty. But it's not a bad looking one, it's just the least favourite of the bunch. Next up, I would probably have to say is the Season 4 till Season 7 bounty, because while I really do like it, again, I do think it's missing certain aspects that I really like about the bounty, being that it's not a full dragon head, and the cab that the ninja used to actually fly it just feels a bit meh, ultimately in the grand scheme of things. But it is still a very nice bounty, and one I'm ultimately very nostalgic for. I just think the other ones are a little bit better. The next up is going to be the Black Bounty, and while I do really like it, I just don't think we saw it enough for it to be any higher than this. And ultimately, it is just a reskin of the original bounty, so it doesn't really get far in terms of its rankings, but it still does beat out 2 other variants. But ultimately, I do like it, and it's the most unique of the bounties, but it is just simpler to have it as the ones that we see ahead of this. And it's also just very gimmicky. But taking the number 3 slot, and probably the one I'm going to get a lot of flack for, I am going to put the original bounty. And I do love this version, I have to say. It has some of my favourite aspects of a bounty, but ultimately speaking, I do just prefer the other 2. But this is not to say I don't like this bounty. I honestly think it does the best in a lot of ways. The actual controls for the bounty, this is the only time this is interior. The head is very nice looking, it feels very expansive, it just ultimately just falls short in comparison to the other 2. The second place slot is going to go to the bounty we get from Season 13 through until Dragon's Rising, because I really do like how this version of the bounty looks. It is essentially a modernized version of the original bounty, which makes sense because it's based off of the legacy design, which is based off of the Season 1 bounty. But it's more meaty, the head looks better, it's just a ultimately better looking bounty, and one I think was very good and I wish we saw a lot more of. But that then does bring us to the number 1 slot, which is of course the Season 8 through until the Season 12 bounty. And what else can I say about this one, to be honest with you? Because it's got the 2 dragon heads, it's got the very nice cab with all their systems in it, it's got a very nice interior, it's got everything I like about the bounty up to the max. I just think this one looks like a ship, and one worthy of the ninja's use, because this one has the most presence about it. And ultimately speaking, it is just the one I enjoy the most, and possibly just the one I have a bit of a bias for, because it's the only bounty to this day I still display, but it is just the best one of the bunch in my opinion. But let me know if you agree or disagree. But that is a look at the Destiny's bounty and my ranking of all of its versions, and let me know how you would rank the bounty yourself. So put it in the comments, your list, and let's see how we compare. But that about does it for today, guys. Thank you for watching, take care, okay,